person cleaning that has mindset around entrepreneurship. So one thing that I wanted to learn a little bit more about, Isabel, is kind of your origin story. When we first connected, you shared a little bit about your family and how they influenced like your own mindset around entrepreneurship. And I'd love you to share that with the audience.
Sure. I grew up in Mexico City. Both of my parents were entrepreneurs. That's all they always did. They went directly into building businesses. They first started each with their own business. My dad had he's a chemist, so he had a company that sold detergents to hospitals and hotels. And then my mother is a designer, and she decided to build a high-end, a company that did plates and decorative accessories for home. And her business started booming very, very quickly. My dad's business was not doing as well. So he joined my mom. My mom was the CEO. My dad was the COO, and they were a team. And however, as a kid growing up with two entrepreneur parents, all I could see was stress, long hours, and it did not sell entrepreneurship very well for me. So I told myself, whatever I do, I'm not going to do what they did because that looks very difficult, very painful. I need to try something else. So yes, for me at the beginning was that's a path, but that's not the path I want to take. So I decided to go and work for companies first, for very large media companies, which now looking back, I think was the best decision because it allowed me to learn how large corporations are structured and learning somebody else's dime. But every time I had, and I continued to rise in positions within Univision, Telemundo, very big media companies, my parents kept saying, why are you working for someone else? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Why are you working so hard for somebody else? So that always was in the back of my mind. And I think when the opportunity was given and I followed the same path as my parents.
So do you have, I assume you have a family. We talked about your kids. Do you think they'll follow your entrepreneurial journey as well, based on what they're seeing with you growing Canela?
I think entrepreneurship is not for all. So seeing my kids, I see some of them could be great entrepreneurs. Some won't be great entrepreneurs. I mean, it's too early to tell. We'll see. But I think people idealize entrepreneurship and they think it's a path for everyone. It really is not for everyone. I think entrepreneurship is harsh. We only see the success, but we don't see everything that goes to it to make it successful. And these personalities, there's specific personalities I think do well on that path. And there's some other people that are amazing. They're going to do great in corporate positions. So when I see my kids, I see maybe one could be that is tenacious, doesn't give up. He thinks outside the box. I think those are kind of the traits that I think will be successful. But I will always push my kids to first start in a corporate job, learn what works, what doesn't work, to be able to pinpoint opportunities. Also, working in a corporate job opens your horizon of companies you can launch in a bigger scale. Because if you come out of college and say, I'm going to do entrepreneurship, you're going to know maybe a few options available. But if you don't understand the pain points of the industries, you don't understand where you can make a difference. And I think working in, even if you get paid $0 in entrepreneurship, just being in the big corporations and seeing what works and not opens a lot your opportunities.
I think that's a really important point to make, that sometimes people think that you actually just have to go straight to it, or that you're born an entrepreneur. There are different pathways to being able to build a business. And I think it's a really interesting insight that you're saying that you took the path of actually learning on somebody else's dime. So I know, Juan, you want to talk a little bit about Isabel's initial startup journey.
Of course. So Isabel, I know when I mentioned earlier that your first startup was Mobius, and why don't you start telling us, where did that come from? What was it doing?
Yeah, I think it started even one company before Mobius. So I was, Cisneros is a family-owned company, very, very large. They're the owners of Venavision. And when the business was passed to Adriana, the daughter, she wanted to be one of the first in mobile advertising. I had already been in large corporations in the innovation departments, and I saw the opportunity of mobile being the first screen for Hispanic audiences and for many audiences. So I was the second employee in the first company focused in advertising to Latinos through mobile. Being the second employee in, it felt like an entrepreneur. A lot was on my shoulders, from hiring, training, opening doors, opening offices. So although I was not an entrepreneur, then it felt like it. After 4 years of running that company and going through a couple mergers, I realized I really enjoy the adrenaline of building something. I love building teams. But then it came back to what my parents said in my head, saying, you don't know any of that. And I was like, wow, yes, I built this huge company. I don't know any of that. I made a nice salary. I'm like, I need to change the way things are structured. So I decided to leave and open my own company. At that time, when I launched Mobius, I didn't know the path of venture to raise capital. I didn't know that was an option. None of my parents raised capital. It was all family, and you make your money and you figure out how to launch something small and then you grow it. So when it was time to launch my own company, an investor reached out to me and say, I have the capital. I'll give you the capital and you have the know-how, and let's launch it that way. So he ended up having 60% of the company. I had 40, but I didn't know any other way to build a business. Mobius became very, very successful the first year in. It was a data-focused company on how we identify Hispanics beyond language. So we know there's a huge growth in the US of Latinos that are second generation, that language is not the primary way to reach them, right? You can be very Latino and be maybe not even speak Spanish. So a year in, we grew very, very, very large very quickly. We became profitable, and we started opening offices all across the US. And my partner, the guy that put the capital, which I didn't know much of him, like I met him, I think 2 coffees, and that was it. He decided to sell his share of the business to a very large media company, public traded. So he had 60. I didn't have drag-along rights. At that time, I didn't know what drag-along rights were. I think that's what happens when you build businesses very young. And so my company got acquired by Precept Group, which is the owners of El País, Caracol Radio, a lot of very large media companies. And at that point, my lawyer advised me, look, you don't have anything to protect you legally at this point. So just figure out how they like you. So figure out if we come to amicable terms. So I stay as the CEO of Mobius, which we rebranded to Precept Brand Solutions for 3 years. I saw that company again flourish and grow. But when I was talking to them, I realized that there was not going to be an exit for me, a successful exit. And then I had to make the very hard decision, say, the most valuable asset that I have is my time. I've done this before, so I have to be willing to walk away from this and build something again from scratch. And that's how Canela got started. After I fell, I had to get up. I gave myself 2 weeks. 2 weeks after I left that company, I say I'm gonna give myself a week to cry, and I'm gonna cry because it's like losing a child. If you know how long it takes to build something, right, and successful, and then I'm gonna give a week to get up and just think my next path. And in 2 weeks after that, I launched Canela.
And then before we get into Canela, I want to dive in more into something that you mentioned, and I knew from before, which is that you didn't do venture or any fundraising. So you found a partner, but did you think about anybody else, or you just thought, I have what I need here? How was that process like?
When I launched Mobius, I didn't know there was another option in my mind. Nobody had raised capital in my family. I have a lot of entrepreneurs, but they all made it with their own money or family money. So I didn't know the different paths available. I did try banks. Mm-hmm. But every time I approach banks, they say, well, you have to be profitable. You have been in business 2 years. So I'm like, okay, so banks are not going to give me money. My family gave me money, but maybe not sufficient to launch a business. And then I have this Italian guy that comes here that just has all this capital and is willing to do it. He seemed very attractive at that point. Yeah. So I'm like, that's my only path. And I took it.
And I think we're going to do a small recap of lessons learned. And I think you maybe mentioned one, but what was the lesson learned through that process as a founder?
Yeah, there's lessons that I think is access, having access to people that can coach you and teach you differently. In my school, there was never talks about venture. There was not talks about how, as an entrepreneur, you can build a business. So I wish I was surrounded with people that could have guided me through that process. The other thing is, as entrepreneurs, and when you're tying cash, you think lawyers are very expensive, and Juan is going to love this point here, which they are. So you're very, very careful when you utilize them. I wish I had relied better counsel at that point that could have told me to launch a business, a letter of intent is not sufficient. You need to think about rag-along rights, percentages, the worst case scenarios. So get a good lawyer. Don't be cheap at that. Get a good.
Which is what you did in Canela, just to tell the audience.
Exactly. We went with a Rolls Royce. But yeah, I think I wish there was more support to younger Latinos, and I am focused on helping younger Latinos understand the options for growth. I think sadly a lot of us are not, and I see it, like I didn't go to an Ivy League school. I grew up, when we moved to the States, my parents are like, you're gonna go to the school next to our house because you need to live at home. Like very traditional in that way. So although I have amazing grades, I was top of my class, I didn't have other option to just go to the school next to me. I do see now the difference when I talk to a lot of kids that are going to Ivy Leagues and I speak in panels. So then a lot of them have already say you can raise capital. They're already having little VC groups within the universities, and it comes down to where you're exposed. I was not exposed to that, so.
Yeah, and I want to make a quick point that I was going to make earlier in the presentation that connects to something that you said. And for the people in the room that could see the graph, in the US venture market, only 2% of capital has been going to Hispanic founded companies. So even for those that are trying to access capital, a very small sliver really goes to them. And for those that don't know the numbers, Hispanics are about 20% of the population in general. So I wanted to show that graph in the context of what you were mentioning and access to capital, whether you're looking for it or not. And Carolina, do you want to get started on the Canela?
Sure. But I realized as more people were coming in, I just want to get a poll of the audience because we've been talking about some terms like drag along, venture, different types of financing. So if I can just get a poll of who here are founders, if you kindly raise your hands. Okay, hands down. And then who are investors? Okay, well, founders and investors, you should probably connect afterwards as well. But I think it's good. So we're pretty much like half. But I think it's important, like we'll probably touch on what drag along means because not everyone may know some of the terminology. But going on to Canela, obviously, this is a business that I'm really, really excited for you. If you could give a little bit of the one-liner, but the catalyst story, and then talk a little bit more about why this market. I think Juan, obviously said something that's disconcerting in terms of like how many Latinos actually are able to raise in the U.S. So talking about the importance of diving into your own identity and why you launched Canela would be amazing.
Well, as you can tell by my very heavy accent, I'm Latina. After being in large corporates, very focused in Hispanic media, I saw a couple gaps. And the biggest gap that I saw in this large corporation was innovation in the digital space. I realized there was so many red tape around these companies that they were not able to innovate, and there was not the talent within. There was no young people working in these companies, so there was not that in their DNA. There was no innovation. So that's why very quickly when digital media started, I focused on that. I saw the path of growth. Why? Because when I graduated college, I very quickly became a manager. I started running teams, and I realized I couldn't, when I went and sold television to advertisers, they would look at me and say, what do you know about television? There was people with a lot of years of experience, but in digital media, I realized young demographics were more likely to succeed. So I'm like, okay, I need to figure out digital media. And so Canela happened because as when I was running my second company, I kept reading in the newspapers everything about the streaming wars. Their streaming wars are huge. You have Disney Plus coming, Netflix spending this much, HBO, and everybody's like, it's the most competitive. And I'm like, hold on a second. This streaming wars is interesting to me. Where are the Latino providers? Yes, I can go to Pluto TV and scroll around their content and maybe at the bottom see a section called Latino. And I start monitoring that. I'm like, hold on, that section has not been changed in 6 months. There's nobody targeting the Hispanic community. And I know Latinos are younger demographic than any other group in the US, and they're cutting cable faster. So if they're not getting Univision and not getting Telemundo, who is catering to this market? So that was like aha moment for me. And I was like, this is what I need to do. This is where the biggest opportunity is. So I went and started doing my P&L. I started doing my cash flow analysis like I do in all my companies. I'm like, hold on a second, I cannot get enough money from my aunt, my dad for this project. So now what do I do? I'm like, I need more capital. So I started reading and I started thinking about venture. And I read testimonials of people saying, oh, I raised a venture. I was with an investor in a napkin. I wrote the idea and they wrote me a check. So I was like, this is going to be so easy. I have proven myself. I have run two companies that have been successful. I'm going to get people begging me to invest. I'm like, how did I even think that? So I put my deck and I'm like, okay, how do I go and find venture capitalists? How do I find venture capitalists? List, and they gave a list. And so I started to just reach out on LinkedIn. And I realized, hold on a second, they're not giving me meetings. I have emailed like 200 people and I don't get a meeting. I'm like, this is going to get a little more difficult. Maybe I don't have the right lead. So I'm like, okay, where else? PitchBook. Okay, there's a thing called PitchBook. I'm going to sign for that and find a better lead. Oh, people are responding. That works. 138 VC meetings later, 138 no's is when my eyes opened and I was like, okay, raising capital is not what I thought. And I always knew I was Latina and my identity was important, but I never felt that being a Latina was something that would make my life more difficult. I always saw as a plus, as a benefit. And I don't believe people are racist. Most people, of course, there's racist people, but I think in venture, people are just, they invest what they used to invest. And when I came and I say I'm successful and this is what I can build, they couldn't see the success in me. They're like, a woman with an accent. Oh, she seems too much of a, I don't know if I can bet on her. So 138 no's, and a lot of those meetings too, which tells you that there is a systemic bias in venture. When our signatures in our office have our picture in the bottom. So I had an email to get meetings, and I had a sales guy that worked for me, and I really needed to get meetings because I was running out of cash. I needed to pay payroll, so it became even more stressful each time. And he's a white man, tall, very good looking. I'm like, can you help me set up meetings? He grabbed my email, pasted, but with his signature, with his picture. He got, I'm not kidding, 10 times more meetings than I did.
I have heard this story before, Isabel, and I think I was mentioning this earlier. That's one of those stories that sounds hard to believe unless you hear it from the person who went through. So I'm happy that you're sharing that, because I guess a lot of people here, I've heard this, they might have never believed that. It's incredible that it worked.
It worked. And when we started the meetings, he will open the meeting and people were like, or he will be with me in the meeting and they will always address him in the conversations, thinking, well, he has to be the CEO, not this girl. So I learned how to play the game, I guess. I realized what existed. And then after that, I'm like, okay, what I'm doing is not working. I have, at that point, I think 4 months left of payroll in my bank. So I need to do something. I already had done a second mortgage in my home. So I was very, very collateralized for this business. So at that point, I'm like, I had to change the way I approach VCs. So I started looking for VCs run by women. I'm like, this could be a good way. And then I started launching, there was a few VCs run by Latinos, and I focused on those. In those 3 months, we became completely oversubscribed. If there was a woman in the other side of the table or a Latino on the other side, then it became very easy to raise capital. They could see success. I didn't have to explain why Latinos are important, how I can run a business. I didn't ask how many kids I was supposed to have. Like things just click in the other side. And at that point, we closed that very oversubscribed round, thanks to targeting the right people.
And one of the things I was going to mention earlier, I believe in venture funds in the US, something like only 2% of venture funds partners are Latino or Hispanic, and there's over 80% of venture funds in the US that don't have a Latino or Hispanic decision maker. So how important, can we dig into that a little bit more? Like, how important was it to have somebody across the table that was Hispanic or a woman?
In my case, was 100% of our investors were Latinos or women in our Series C. That is all. I didn't get any offer letters from a VC that did not have a Latino in staff that championed us. if the Latino was present, they became cheerleaders of the company because they saw the opportunity, or females. So yeah, my seat, I think it's crucial. People invest in themselves, I think, in few words. So if you're a Latino one side, you're more likely to invest probably in Latinos because you can see success in them. If you're a white man or you just don't see success in a Latina, or it's too risky. Even in our, and I think to the point, even in our Series A that we closed, I just recently found out that some of our investors, one of the concerns was they thought we made up the financials. And I wonder if that would have ever been raised if I was not a Latina, because they were too good. They looked too good. How can it be possible for someone to grow so quickly in such a large organization? And so now we have to understand the game, and I'm getting prepared for my next round. So when I do that, I got everything audited by Insurgent as at the top out. So there's no doubt. So you have to learn how to play the game, I think, and just the reality.
There's a lot of VCs here based in LATAM. Did you interact with any of the VC LATAM audience?
I did not. I mean, I moved to the States when I was 15. So I am super Latina, but also all my business experience has been in the US. And so when I thought about raising capital, I didn't even know the option of going to Latin America. I just was thinking very focused in New York and the areas I was. So no, I never met with VCs in Mexico.
Yeah.
And to double click on that piece, there are different markets, right? And just in terms of your roadmap for Canela, do you see yourselves expanding internationally to more LATAM, going outside of the US? What does that look like?
Yes, today we're in Mexico and Colombia. Those markets have grown very, very fast for us, but they're still behind when it comes to streaming OTT technology. So a lot of the brands are not investing yet in OTT. So I think it's a few years back is what I used to see 3 years ago in this market. So I know they're going to get there. And when they get there, it's going to be very powerful. For that reason, we wanted to be one of the first in market to grow our brand and create that loyalty with our viewer. We are looking to expand into all Latin America probably by next year. And the year after that, probably Brazil. It's a little more complicated because of the language.
Got it. And I think just evaluating media and venture is hard. Having spent my time at K4, we didn't touch content, especially when you get to the point where you're supposed to produce content, which takes a long time, right? So I also assumed that there was a limit in terms of how many VCs who actually had media experience and could invest or understand your business. I'd be curious to know, were there other, you talked about women and you talked about Latinos, but were there media investors also who had that domain experience involved on the cap table?
There is one in the cap table, but I did meet with all of them. There's not a lot of investment in media. You're right. They wanted us to change our business model to an SVOD, so subscription, so they could quantify it and feel more safe on that. Now, if I had changed that model, that business will have never been successful. And we're seeing that in business that are subscription-based moving into an AVOD. So it was before all this noise in the marketplace when people thought subscription-based was the way to go. Now with the economy and the amount of streaming services out there, everybody is betting the growth is coming from ad-supported businesses. But yes, there's not a lot of investment in media because very few companies make it in the media space. Media space is about scale, and to scale to large numbers is difficult.
Got it. Juan, do you want to touch in a little bit more on the fundraising process?
Sure. So let's catch up a little bit here. So at the end, and I remember this part a little bit, you had options. What was that process like, and why did you end up going with the people? And I'm almost interested in the two sides of the question, because I feel like you probably picked some for some reasons, but I feel like you probably didn't pick ones for other specific reasons. So if you can touch on both sides on that, I think that will be interesting.
When the company was successful for the eyes of investors for my Series A, we had incredible financials. We were profitable. We grew 8 times the revenues in a year. Like they were bulletproof, the numbers for a lot of them. So then, yes, I started getting a lot of attention from a lot of investors. And that point, I realized I wanted to do what was right, what I felt is right. If few people could invest in me, I want to make sure I reward those people. And so I allowed them to come into my Series A, invest as much as they wanted. So they took the priority because they were the first people that believed in me. But then for the lead investors, yes, we talked to some of the biggest VCs and they were interested to invest. But then when I started to see the representation in their side, are you supporting Hispanics? Are you giving back to the community? I did not see that. So what I decided to have lead my round was a VC that 80% of the LPs were women or people of color, because that's important to me. If we're gonna create wealth, for me, it's important that wealth is passed on to minorities as well. And I knew if the company continues to grow how it is, there was gonna be a lot of wealth. And I wanted to make sure people of color got that wealth. So I chose my lead investor, Crew Capital, and Angeles Investors, which is actually not even a VC, it's an angel group. But I call them my angels because they're all Latinos that care about the future of Latinos and supporting Latino communities. So I sent the message to the market saying the money has to come in by Latinos, but also whatever comes out is to support our communities.
So I think it's really important to think about who we're making money alongside, who we're making money for. So big fan of Crew because Teresa's on my IC. But how did you find it? Because you mentioned Angeles. How did you, I think it's a great story and how you came about and found it.
So they were just launching Angeles Investors, and in LinkedIn, there was an article on Adela Cepeda. And Adela has been a very successful businesswoman. And she was talking about the need to invest in Latino and how they were looking for businesses that met certain criteria. I read it and I responded to her, I'm your next investment. You need to meet with me. And she did meet with me and she helped me through the process, which I think that's what was interesting when I was raising my seeds. Like, Isabel, you should not show the information this way. Have you considered? So she really walked me on how to improve my presentation, my financials, to show in the way that what was a data room. It's like, do you have a data room? And I'm like, what is a data room? She's like, oh, this is what you need in a data room. So she walked me through the process. So she was my angel. And so now I'm like, I'm supported by Latinos and I want to support them back because they've been great to me.
And I wonder, I don't want to make it too legal, but are there terms that you felt strongly when you were negotiating? I know that maybe we can talk a little bit about the drag along. What were the lessons that you learned from your previous venture that you kind of carried to when you were really negotiating those terms?
I negotiate everything. So for my lawyers can be very, very painful because I think everything can be negotiated. And that's my Latino blood, I think. My mom says that I must have a high, maybe a more Jewish blood in me. And so I look at the agreement, and I sit with my lawyers, I'm like, what's negotiable? The 20 things are negotiable. I'm like, yeah, but how about that? Is that negotiable? Most people don't. And I tell one, okay, tell me the most crazy negotiations you've done, because I want to be able to negotiate every single point, because I've been in the other side where I did not negotiate. And I realized everything is negotiable. So what do you negotiate? One of the big things is the board seats. Everybody wants a board seat. So when you're raising capital and you're closing your round, everybody's super nice to you. And you know the ask is going to come. Can I have a board seat? And you feel guilty if you're a first-time founder because they're being so nice to you through the process. Say no. Be okay to say no. Keep that boardroom small.
Absolutely.
So everybody wants a board seat. Also negotiate the option to be able to sell some of the shares without board approval. So you can capitalize yourself through the process, because founders, we put everything in the line. So don't expect to be eating ramen the whole time. Like, you're done successful job, being able to provide yourself for a decent life living is okay. So negotiate a good percentage on shares that you can sell without board approval. What else do I negotiate? I mean, the price. You'll be surprised how much say you have on the price of everyone. Make sure you're thinking post, not pre-evaluation, but post-valuation with the dollars. Put those dollars when you negotiate. I think that's very, very important. I really thought about every single thing that could be, and then power in the boardroom. You want to make sure that you're protected. So if they fire you later on, you're in a situation where it's going to be very good for you.
I think board control is a key one, and not only board control without going into many details, also like who can be at the board meeting. The observer mix is a situation that many founders, first time particularly, have maybe too many observers.
Too many observers. Everybody puts the observer. I think what I have learned is you can say no. They make it sound that VCs like that's a key thing, and then when you say no, you realize they still invest. So I think have a power to say no. And yeah, observers. If I had said yes, I will have 20 observers in my boardroom. Observers do make a difference because they're very vocal. So your boardroom will run like you have 20 additional people. So if you can move away from that, and then be careful with side letters. I think that's the other thing. You have your main contract and you agree on the terms, and then the VC say, oh, I have a little side letter for you. Those little side letters have a lot of petitions.
And they accumulate.
And I think we saw that from our seed to our Series A. I think we had like 8 side letters to deal with. So I think if the terms are fair from both parties, say these terms should be fair to you, no side letters.
And we just went through, I think, some like tips for first-time founders. What are recommendations you would have for the investors in the room?
And the founders?
From you, like for the investors. How can the process be easier, harder?
I think it's understand well where that founder sits, and what I mean where it sits where they are financially. I think there's a lot of pressure, and VCs is like, oh, we're gonna close a little bit later, but what does that mean for them and their company? A lot of founders they're gonna put the best view for investors to see, right? Everything's beautiful and rosy, but there might be stress that they cannot pay payroll next month. They might be stressed that there's a lot of things happening, and some of the requests that you're making, instead of moving forward, the process is slowing it down. So before you ask for 1 billion different reports or things that will slow the process, be certain that that's something you need, and it's not just a luxury that you're asking, because that slows down a lot of the process for founders. For me and this is an interesting story, I had a VC that was going to lead my seed round, and I had a month left of payroll. And I asked them if they could please invest the money, and they said no until you get the round fully closed. At that point, I was like, I'm going to have to shut this company. I have a term sheet, but I cannot get everybody else around me. So I decided to drop that. I decided to drop that term sheet and go for another investor that could help me in the moments of trouble and invest the money a little quickly. That just showed me how willing they were to work with me. And I think just give an opportunity to people that don't look like you. Push yourself to say, am I just investing to this person because she talks like me, has the same background, sent to the same school? What about this other founder? I'm interested on it. Think maybe, go a little bit adventurous and invest in a Latina.
So one thing I've been thinking about a lot is mindset, right? Like when you talked about like even one of your children having this like grit and power of persistence, but like even through this whole fundraising journey, because fundraising is hard in general, but it becomes even harder when you have a limited pool, you're getting rejected left and right. Like, how do you manage for the founders that are here? How did you manage your own mindset?
It's very hard. I think it is very hard. After getting so many rejections, you start questioning yourself. You're like, maybe my idea is not that good. Maybe, and I think you go into a low, and it's difficult because how many rejections can you take and still feel confident on your idea view, right? But in our case, if you know that is right, if you know that concept, because you have enough knowledge in that industry, will be successful, don't let anyone persuade you differently. If I had been persuaded by all the VCs that I talk, I would not have a advertising business, and it would not be Hispanic, because everybody asks me, can you just do a general market? If you know it's the right product, you just have to keep pushing. Somebody will believe in you. So maybe you're at 138 VC and your 139 is the right one. So there is not, because you get so many no's means that your idea is wrong. Sometimes the best ideas out there are ideas that people don't understand.
Yeah, so I think there's something really powerful about like having the power to believe when others do not. and you had that level of conviction, but you also had the conviction to be able to say no.
Yes.
So that when you realize that that person on the other side that you basically are getting into a marriage with wasn't the right investor for you. So I think that's kind of like a founder tip. Like, it is important who you are making money alongside. I cannot stress that more.
Another thing that is important, I think, and I just kind of start applying in my Series A, understand what success looks like for that VC. It's very important you're aligned on what the path of success is for the other VC. Because if you have a path of you're going to build a company and exit, and the other VC is just looking for a unicorn and you have to go in public markets, you have to understand that, and you have to have that conversation to make sure you're paired with the right investor. Because no matter how successful you are, if you're not paired to that level of success or returns of capital that they need, it's going to be a miserable relationship. So that was always my first question to VC. What is success? What return are you looking in your investment? And understand that very well to understand if you're going to be the right partner for them.
Yeah, and I think that's a really powerful question around understanding fund math, right? A fund that is a $25 million, $15 million fund is very different than a fund that's multi-stage managing more than $1 billion AUM, right? Different outcomes, like to the point that you're saying, are needed. Juan, do you want to close up?
Sure. Well, first of all, Isabel, thank you so much for that. Karina, I don't think we're gonna do the slides at this point.
No, I
No.
think we had a lot of slides for you.
I
We
had
were
such a
setting
good
context.
presentation at the beginning.
We did, and we thank you, Victor, so much for those slides. But I think we kind of touched on a lot of the points.
I think that's true. So thank you, Isabel. Thanks, everybody. Now we're gonna go to the networking piece. The food is outside. And if the people who are seated in this side can start moving out, because eventually this room will open to the other side. But that's it for the panel. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much. And it's Latin food, folks. Gracias, Isabel.
Wait before you report.
Thank you.
Okay, like